welcome to Boring History. Tonight, we'll be exploring why you wouldn't survive a day in a 17th century whaling ship, and more. If you enjoy our videos, please comment below on what other history topics you'd like us to explore, and don't forget to like and subscribe, so you never miss one of our daily releases. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and let me guide you into a time and place you'll want to sleep through, but also never forget. Imagine stepping onto a wooden deck that moans beneath your feet. The Arctic chill bites your face, but it's the sharp tamps of whale oil and brine that stains your lungs. Around you, men in oily, stained clothing move silently under flickering candlelight. Each brace is practiced, each motion forced. Ahead, pot furnaces hiss and clatter as molten blubber bubbles atop a brick hearth, threatening to scorch the deck below. Its soot and heat wrapping you like a second skin. Let's step aboard and breathe the peril they dared. Yet worse still is the sudden drag. A harpooned whale's fury yanks the whaleboat across the sea at up to 23 miles per hour. Nantucket sleighride that can drag you to the depths or fracture bones in seconds. This deck is not for the faint-hearted. Men worked under a lay system, hoping for whale oil profit, risking debt if nothing was caught. Discipline was harsh, food was scarce, and every day you gambled between the stroke of a harpoon and the hiss of a try-work fire. Tonight, we live through that brutal day, from flensing blubber to scraping greasy decks. Rotten biscuits, harpoon, splinters, and the smell of blubber vats. The dawn of the whaling day. Close your eyes. Let the world around you fall silent, except for the faint and constant sounds of the sea. Waves lapping gently against the hull, the soft creak of timbers shifting beneath your feet, and the whisper of sails catching a lazy morning breeze. You're aboard a 17th century whaling ship, an ancient, weather-beaten vessel that smells of salt, sweat, and the thick, cloying odor of blubber rendered and burned in treat. The air is heavy and damp, hanging with the ghosts of countless voyages and hard labor. Below decks, in the cramped crew quarters, the darkness is thick enough to swallow sound. Your hammock sways faintly, creaking softly with each roll of the ship. The wood beneath you is cold and rough, and the air is stale, tinged with the sharp bite of old brine and the faintest hint of decay. You hear the soft snore of the man next to you, mingled with the coughs and groans of men waking slowly from restless sleep. The cold bites into your bones. Your clothes are stiff with salt, and the remnants of last night's oil and sweat cling stubbornly to your skin. Your hands ache where the rope has rubbed raw, and your muscles remind you sharply of the work still ahead. Above, footsteps echo on the deck, boots dragging across wet planks. The early morning chill seeps in through the cracks around the hat. The captain's gruff voice cuts through the quieter, sharp bark of orders. The sound of buckets scraped along the deck, and the low murmur of men stirring to action. You rise slowly from your hammock, careful not to disturb your neighbors. Every movement is deliberate. Even the simplest actions carry the weight of exhaustion and routine. Your boots scrape against the wooden floor as you stand, stiff and unyielding, each joint protesting. In the galley, if it can be called that, the iron stove sits cold and unused. The morning meal awaits hardtack, the brittle, rock-hard biscuit that is both sustenance and torment. You take a piece from the wooden barrel, its edges crumbling in your fingers like dry earth. You crack it open on the rail, brushing off the powdery dust and, as usual, the tiny weevils that have taken residence inside. Others eat them without thought, crunching absently on the bugs, as if the taste is irrelevant to survival. Water comes next, drawn from a barrel that smells faintly of rot and seaweed. It tastes of the wooden vessel that holds it, brackish, stale, barely wet enough to wash down the biscuit, yet it is enough. It must be. The day is already beginning before the sun has risen fully. You climb the ladder, hands and knees bracing against the slick, salt-worn wood, emerging onto a deck slick with spray and dew. The grey light filters weakly through the heavy clouds, casting a muted glow over the restless sea. The chill wind slices through your shirt like a blade. Around you, the ship hums with the rhythm of preparation. Ropes coil like sleeping snakes at your feet. Men stretch their stiff limbs and spit into the sea, shaking off the frost from their faces. Buckets clang, sails snap, and the scent of salt, tar, and smoke hangs thick in the air. Work begins. It is endless, scraping salt from railings, tightening sails until your fingers burn, heaving barrels heavy with oil and water. The deck is never clean. Yesterday's grime clings to every surface like a permanent stain. There is no reward for the labor, only the relief of completing the task and the knowledge that the next will come soon enough. The captain stands above it all, a grim figure barking commands with a voice roughened by years of sea and storm. The first mate moves silently in the shadows, a stern man whose smile never breaks the surface of his weather-beaten face. Time moves sluggishly, like honey dripping in the cold air. Each moment is drawn out, thick and unyielding, punctuated only by the occasional call from the lookout. There she blows. At that cry, the world shifts. The men scramble, harpoons are passed forward, and the small whaleboats are lowered with careful, practiced hands. You take your place in one of them, heart pounding, muscles readying for the long, exhausting chase. The sea seems endless and indifferent. The whale's breath rises far ahead, a misty plume against the grey horizon. The row begins. Arms strain, backs burn, and the cold gnaws at exposed skin. The rhythm of the oars is steady, deliberate, silent, save for the splash of blades cutting through water. The hunt is on. The relentless grind work, weight, and the whisper of danger. The whaleboat rocks gently in the grey swell as you row. The cold bites deeper, now your fingers stiffen. Your breath clouds the air in small puffs. Each stroke pulls you closer to the great shape beneath the waves, the creature that will demand everything from you. The muscles in your arms burn with effort, and your back aches in protest. But you push on. The sea is endless, the sky a flat sheet of slate, and the world narrows to the dip and lift of your oars, the distant spout of the whale, and the tightening rope coiled on your arm. The harpooner stands, steady and poised, every fiber of his being tuned to the moment. The rope is coiled tight around his forearm like a serpent ready to strike. The first throw is sudden, violent, a sharp snap as the harpoon flies through the air, embedding deep in the whale's flesh. The line goes taut with a roar. The boat jerks forward. The chase is on. The whale dives, powerful and unyielding, dragging the boat in a wild dance across the waves. The water oils, dark and churning. Men shout warnings, scramble to keep balance, and row with desperate strength. Hours stretch out like years. The salt water stings your eyes. Your throat is raw from shouting and sea spray. Oars dip and rise in a relentless rhythm, your body pushed to its limits and beyond. Sometimes the whale surfaces, thrashing violently. Its massive tail slaps the water with thunderous force. The boat rocks dangerously. Men are thrown against rails or into the sea. You grip desperately, heart hammering. This is no easy victory. It is a brutal test of endurance and will, eventually, the whale tires. It surfaces less frequently. Its thrashing slows. The men press the attack, throwing harpoons again and again, blood darkening the water. When the great beast finally surrenders, it is a quiet death, slow and inexorable. The water stills. The flukes cease their powerful strokes, but the fight is far from over. The carcass must be secured alongside the ship, a task that demands every ounce of strength left in your body. You and your crewmates strain against the lines, dragging the immense bulk closer. The ship groans under the weight and strain. Then begins the grueling work of flensing. Men lower themselves onto the whale's body with iron hooks and knives. The blubber is thick, a dense layer of fat and skin, slick and heavy with oil. It is cut in strips as thick as mattresses and peeled away like ancient bark. The smell is overpowering, a thick, greasy stench that clings to clothes, skin, and breath. It is a mixture of sweet decay, burnt oil, and salt. Below, the tripods are lit. Giant iron cauldrons where the blubber is rendered down to oil. The fires hiss and crackle, smoke billowing into the sky. Heat rises in waves. Sweat pours down your back. The deck is slick with oil and blood. Footing is treacherous. Each man works with grim determination, eyes stinging from smoke and salt spray. Blisters form on raw hands. Muscles scream in protest. This work lasts through the night. There is no rest, no rest. The oil is precious, worth the misery, the danger, the endless toil. When the last drop is drawn from the blubber, barrels are sealed and stowed below deck. Only then can you collapse into your hammock, utterly spent, covered in grime, the taste of salt and smoke thick on your tongue. You dream of solid ground, of fresh air, free from the ever-present stench. But the sea does not forget. It calls you back, again and again. And so the cycle continues. The endless ocean and the weight of time. Days blur together on the endless ocean. Time loses meaning when your world is a wooden box rocking on a vast, grey soup of water and sky. Mornings are not defined by sunlight but by the ship's chorus. The creak of timbers, the slap of waves, the shouts of men rising to their brutal tasks. The cold is constant, a sharp, biting companion that settles into your bones. Your body moves on, habit and necessity. Every joint aches. Every breath tastes of salt and smoke. Between hunts, boredom gnaws at the soul. The vast silence presses in, heavier than any storm. Men cling to small rituals, carving scrimshaw into whalebone, playing quiet games of dice with knuckle bones, sharing whispered tales of home and the world beyond the waves. There is camaraderie, but also simmering tension. The ship is a pressure cooker of fear, fatigue, and despair. A single mistake could be fatal. A slip on the slick deck, a tangled rope, a missed signal, and the sea would claim another. The threat is invisible but constant. At night, the sky stretches wide and black, pierced by cold stars. The ship is a tiny, fragile island afloat in an infinite void. Sleep is a shallow refuge, broken by the cold, the smell, the creaks and groans. Dreams are fractured, memories of land, laughter, warmth, and the unyielding sea. Above deck, the captain and mates pace the decks, watchful eyes scanning the horizon. Their word is law, their orders absolute. Disobedience means harsh punishment, lashings, confinement, or worse. Yet even discipline can kill the annoying hunger in your belly or the ache in your bones. Food is scarce, monotonous, and often spoiled. The staple remains hardtack dense, dry biscuits, infested with weevils, eaten out of necessity. Water is rationed, often brackish, carrying a hint of rot from long storage. You swallow each meal with a grimace, knowing it's what keeps you alive, but it is never enough. Illness spreads quickly in cramped quarters. Fever, dysentery, scurvy, invisible killers that claim more lives. The ship's surgeon is often overwhelmed, limited to primitive tools and medicines. Sailors whisper of men who never wake, their bodies slipped silently into the sea. The ocean's embrace is final and merciless, yet still you endure, because to stop is to die, because the sea is not just a place, it is a way of life. A constant struggle against nature, against time, and against yourself. And so, you press on. The hunt's toll, bodies, minds, and spirits. The hunt is more than just physical exertion. It's a test of endurance, nerve, and sheer will. Hours, sometimes days, pass in relentless pursuit of a single whale. Each man's body is pushed beyond its limits. Muscles screaming, lungs burning, hands raw from rope burns. But the true toll is harder to measure. In the cramped space of the whaleboat, fear coils tight. The whale is a massive force of nature, thrashing and diving with terrifying power. Men grip their harpoons like lifelines, knowing a slip could mean death by drowning or by the angry beast itself. The cries of the crew are swallowed by the vastness of the ocean. The tension is electric. Every breath could be the last. When the whale charges or breaches, the sea erupts in chaos. Oars snap, men tumble, curses echo. Injuries are common. Broken bones, deep cuts, sometimes worse. But the adrenaline dulls the pain, and the chase continues. Back on the ship, the flensing crew waits in grim silence. They prepare to strip the blubber, to process the beast into barrels of oil. The lifeblood of the industry. It is grueling, filthy, and dangerous work. The smell of boiling blubber fills the air, sweet and sickly. Smoke and steam blur vision and burn eyes. Men work until exhaustion, slipping on oily decks, muscles trembling but hands steady. The ship's wood is stained dark, slick with grease and blood. Evenings bring no relief. Cold seeps in deeper as the day's labor drains the last reserves of strength. Sleep is fitful, haunted by the image of the whale's last thrash, or the faces of fallen comrades. The sea seems endless, unyielding. A place where hope is a fragile ember. In these moments, many men turn to superstition or prayer, clutching talismans or whispering pleas to gods they barely believe in. Yet life aboard the ship is not just hardship. Amidst the cruelty and monotony, small moments of humanity bloom. A shared joke between mates, a comforting pat on the shoulder, the quiet song of a sailor as he carves a scrimshaw piece by dim lantern light. These flickers of warmth offer brief respite from the harsh reality. They remind the men of home, of lives beyond the endless waves. But the ship is never still for long. Dawn brings new tasks, new struggles. The rhythm of the sea, slow, relentless, resumes, a constant struggle. The endless horizon. Reflections on life at sea as the days blur into one another. You stand on deck, staring out over the endless horizon, where sky and water merge in a misty grey line that never seems to move. The wind whispers secrets in your ears, carrying the salt and cold that sting your skin. Each wave crashes against the hull with a steady rhythm, a lullaby, and a warning, all at once. The ship creaks beneath your feet, an old beast breathing steadily despite the years and storms. You learn to read its language, the groan of stressed timber, the snap of tightening ropes, the slap of sails filled with wind. Around you, the crew moves like shadows, their faces lined with sun and salt. Some speak little, lost in their own thoughts. Others sing low songs, notes swallowed by the vast ocean. Time stretches thin, a fragile thread binding the hours. You think of home, of warm hearths, of fresh bread and soft beds, of loved ones whose faces grow distant with each passing day. But here, on the endless blue home, is a dream that drifts just beyond reach. You live in the rhythm of the ship, the pulse of the hunt, the labor that never ceases. Every day is a battle against exhaustion, against despair, against the slow erosion of hope. Yet, despite it all, you persist, because the sea demands it, because the ship is your world now, because, in the vast silence, you find a strange kind of peace, a constant struggle. And so, the voyage continues. The cabin boy who became a pirate king. From order to anarchy on the high seas, close your eyes. Imagine the cramped wooden cabin where a young boy sleeps, his body curled tight against the cold drafts that sneak through the ships. His name is John King, no more than 12 years old. His hands are raw from ropes, and his face still carries the faint innocence of youth, quickly fading with each passing day at sea. The ship is a vessel of strict order and harsh discipline. Each man knows his place, his role carved into the hierarchy by force and fear. John, the cabin boy, answers to all and no one. He fetches water, cleans the decks, and watches silently from the shadows, learning the language of grunts, whistles, and sharp orders. But beneath the veneer of discipline simmers something darker, a restless hunger for freedom, for a life not dictated by the captain's whip or the first mate's glare. The boy's world tilts the day the ship falls under the shadow of pirate, not the romanticized swashbucklers of storybooks, but brutal men driven by desperation, greed, and survival. The raid is swift and violent. Screams echo over the water as the pirates board, cutting through the crew's ranks. Amid the chaos, John finds a strange clarity. He watches men fall, some begging, others fighting with reckless fury. The line between order and anarchy blurs, replaced by raw, unfiltered survival. John is seized, not as a prisoner, but as a recruit. The pirates see in him something valuably, speed, and a blank slate. He trades the rigid discipline of his old ship for the chaotic freedom of pirate life. Days turn to weeks. John learns the ways of his new world. He rows in longboats under moonlight, silent, except for the splash of oars. He learns to handle a cutlass, the weight balanced between his small hands. He listens to tales told over flickering lanterns, stories of lost treasure, cursed seas, and vengeful spirits. But the pirate life is no fairy tale. It is harsh, cold, and cruel. The men live on the edge of desperation, always one step from death. Food is scarce, drink scarcer. Trust is a fragile thing, broken as easily as a snapped rope. Yet, within this chaos, John finds a strange kinship. He grows stronger, smarter, more cunning. He learns to read the wind, to predict the tides, to navigate by stars and whispers. The boy grows into a manor leader among thieves. The cabin boy becomes a pirate king. His name whispered with fear and awe in ports from the Caribbean to the Barbary coast. But power comes with its own burdens. The line between freedom and tyranny blurs. John must wrestle with ghosts of his lost innocence, of the lives shattered by his rise. He looks to the horizon, knowing the sea will claim him one day. But for now, he rules the waves. A constant struggle. The pirate ship is a world apart from the ordered vessels John once knew. Here there are no bright sails or neatly coiled ropes. Instead, the decks are scarred by battle, stained with salt and sweat, with splinters of wood jutting like broken teeth. The air is thick with smoke from the cooking fires, mingled with the acrid temps of gunpowder and the salty breath of the sea. John moves through this chaotic environment with growing confidence. He learns to anticipate the captain's sharp commands, the sudden rush to arms, and the tense silence that falls before an attack. Every creak of the timbers and whistle of the wind becomes a language he understands, a rhythm that keeps him alive. The men around him are rough and broken in equal measure. Some speak in gruff whispers of lost families and broken dreams. Others laugh with a hollow edge, as if mocking the fate that has tethered them to this life. John listens, absorbing every story, every warning, every lesson carved into the scars on their hands and faces. Food is scarce and bitter. Hardtack biscuits are replaced by salted pork and fish that sometimes smell more like the ocean floor than something edible. Water is rationed, sometimes thick with brine or slimy from storage in barrels too long left open. Yet, even with such meager provisions, the men feast when the spoils of a raid come in a brief moment of abundance, marked by shouts, songs, and crude laughter. John's role evolves, no longer just a cabin boy fetching water and sweeping decks. He becomes an essential part of the crew's survival. He learns to navigate, to repair sails torn by storms, to patch leaks before the cold sea can claim the ship. His hands grow calloused and strong, his muscles lean from the relentless work, but with survival comes violence. Raids are brutal affairs. Ships are boarded with fire and fury, men killed or captured without mercy. John watches, sometimes with wide eyes, sometimes with a numbness that grows like a shadow in his chest. He understands quickly. Mercy is a luxury they cannot afford. In quiet moments, John steals away to the edge of the ship, staring out at the endless expanse of water. The horizon stretches like a promise and a threat all at once. He thinks of the world he left behind, families, homes, the distant smell of forests and fresh bread. But those memories feel like ghosts, slipping further away with each wave. As months pass, the boy-turned pirate earns the respect of his comrade. His quick wit and steady hand during skirmishes mark him as a leader in the making. Stories spread among the crew of the cabin boy who fights like a seasoned man, who can charm and command with equal ease. And yet, beneath the rough exterior, John struggles with his own humanity. The lines blur between right and wrong, survival and cruelty. He dreams of freedom not just from his captors, but from the cycle of violence that threatens to consume him. The sea is a constant teacher, offering lessons in resilience and ruthlessness. John King stands at the crossroads of boyhood and manhood, of order and chaos, a constant struggle. The pirate's life is punctuated by the roar of cannon fire and the clash of steel. John finds himself in the thick of these moments, heart hammering as the ship pitches beneath him. The air is thick with smoke and salt spray, and every shout feels like a command to survive, to stray, to not let fear freeze his limbs. The battles are messy and chaotic. Men grapple on slippery decks, slick with blood and seawater, the cries of the wounded mixing with the sharp clang of swords. John's hands tremble at first, but soon the adrenaline hardens his resolve. He learns to duck, to parry, to thrust with precision born of desperation. After the fight, the aftermath is both gruesome and routine. The wounded are dragged below deck, moans muffled by the creaking timbers. The dead are lashed to planks and cast into the sea with little ceremony, no prayers, no goodbyes. Death is another crewmate here, silent and ever-present. John begins to understand the strange bonds that tie the pirates together. They are not just comrades in arms, but a rough family forged by hardship and the constant threat of oblivion. Loyalty is their currency, and betrayal the gravest sin. The captain, a grizzled man named Black Tom, watches John with a calculating eye. There is something in the boy's determination, a spark of something fierce and unyielding that reminds the captain of his younger self. Black Tom takes John under his wing, teaching him the art of navigation by the stars, the secrets of reading the wind and waves, and the brutal calculus of pirate politics. John learns that survival at sea is as much about knowing when to fight as when to flee. Black Tom shares stories of ships lost to storms, crews swallowed by the merciless ocean, and the fleeting moments of fortune that can turn a desperate man into a legend or leave him a forgotten name etched on driftwood. Through it all, John's thoughts often drift to the home he left behind, a place that now seems like a distant dream, softened by time but sharpened by absence. He wonders if he'll ever return, if he even wants to. The sea has changed him, carved new edges into his soul. Yet, even amidst the chaos, there are moments of eerie calm. The ship's crew sometimes gathers beneath a moonlit sky, sharing quiet stories and songs passed down through generations. The music is rough but sincere, a fragile thread of humanity woven through the relentless noise of the sea. John listens, and in those moments, he glimpses a world beyond the endless struggler world of memories, hopesy, and the small, stubborn sparks of beauty that refuse to be extinguished. The sea demands everything, but it cannot claim the heart entirely. A constant struggle. The days blend into nights, and the seasons pass in a blur of salt spray and relentless sun. John grows stronger, tougher, the boy who once feared the ocean now its willing servant. His hands bear new scars, maps of battles fought and hard lessons learned. The sea has etched its mark on him, as much as the brand of the pirate's life. Life aboard the ship is a brutal routine of endless tasks, each as unforgiving as the last. The sails must be mended before they tear apart, the ropes coiled tight and ready for any sudden maneuver, the decks scrubbed till they gleam, or at least as clean as they can be given the ceaseless spray and grime. Even sleep is a luxury, stolen in short bursts between watches, while the cold wind bites into every exposed inch of skin. Yet, despite the hardship, a camaraderie thrives in the darkest corners of the ship. The men rough, scarred and broken in ways only the sea can make, find moments of laughter. Songs shouted over the roar of the waves, and stories spun under starlit skies. They are bound by shared danger, a kinship forged not in comfort but in survival. John is no longer just a cabin boy. He is trusted with small duties once reserved for seasoned sailors. He climbs the rigging without hesitation now, balancing atop the mast where the horizon stretches endless and blue. His eyes, once wide with fear, now scan the seas with a pirate's calculating gaze. Black Tom's mentorship is unwavering. He teaches John the art of negotiation, how to bluff and barter with other crews and port authorities. There is cunning in piracy as much as Valence's game of shadows and whispers, of knowing when to strike and when to vanish into the mist. Yet, for all the freedom the sea promises, John can't shake a growing weight in his chest. The life of a pirate is one of constant flight from the law, from enemies, from the ghosts of the past. He wonders if the freedom he sought is just another kind of prison, one with no walls but endless waves. One cold evening, as the ship cuts silently through the fog, John finds himself alone on the quarter. The world is muted except for the soft creak of wood and the faint splash of water against the hull. He pulls his coat tighter around him and looks toward the distant lights of a coastline he does not recognize. In that quiet moment, John contemplates the cost of the path he has chosen. The boy who dreamed of adventure now understands the price is steep, and it's paid in blood, sweat, and the slow erosion of the soul. But still, the sea calls, a constant struggle. The years roll on, and the legend of John King grows not just as a pirate, but as a man forged in the brutal crucible of the sea. His name whispers through taverns and ports, a shadowy figure both feared and respected. But behind every tale of daring and danger lies a quieter, truther boy who lost his family, who faced hunger and cold, who learned to survive on scraps and sheer will. He is a man caught between worlds, the lawless freedom of the ocean and the crushing weight of consequence. The sea offers no promises, only endless horizon and the relentless pull of tides. For John, every day is a battle not just with enemies, but with himself. He remembers the faces of those he left behind, the mother who kissed his brow before he boarded that ship, the brother lost to sickness and neglect. He carries their memory like a talisman, a reminder of what was and what might have been. Piracy, for all its danger and glory, is a life lived in the margins, always hunted, never home. John's journey is a testament to resilience, a saga of survival in a world that offers no quarter. As the ship sails into the twilight, John stands at the bow, eyes fixed on the fading sun. The wind tangles his hair, the salt stings his skin, and somewhere deep inside, the boy he once was still listens to the rhythm of the waves. A constant struggle, and through it all, the sea endures eternal, unforgiving, and strangely comforting. The Arctic whalers, who ate their boots. Imagine the biting cold, not just the kind that nips your nose or makes your fingers numb. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones, freezes the breath in your lungs, and makes the very air feel like shards of ice. This is the Arctic vast, desolate, and merciless. Whalers who dared to chase the leviathans here faced not only the beasts of the deep, but the wrath of the frozen north itself. The sun barely rose, casting pale shadows across a landscape of ice floes that cracked and groaned beneath their feet. The ships creaked and moaned under the strain of the ice, trapped in a labyrinth of frozen death. Men wrapped in layers of wool and fur struggled to keep warm, their faces cracked and bleeding from the relentless wind. Food was scarce. Rations grew thin. And then came the stories rumors whispered in frostbitten voices that men were eating their own boots to survive. It sounds like madness, but desperation drives men to strange acts. The boots, hardened leather soaked in salt and sweat, were boiled in attempts to extract any nourishing scraps, bitter and foul. But it was sustenance. This was survival, stripped to its rawest form. Amidst the creaking ice and the howling wind, the whalers clung to hope. Each day was a battle against frostbite, starvation, and the creeping despair that settled like a shadow. But the sea called to them still, promising oil and fortune to those brave or foolish enough to endure. The cold in the Arctic is not just a temperature, it is an omnipresent force that infiltrates every corner of a man's life on the ice-locked ship. It creeps through every crack in clothing, settles beneath layers of wool, and gnaws relentlessly at exposed skin until even the sturdiest wear is brought low. Imagine waking each morning to a world shrouded in whiter blizzards so thick it blots out the horizon. The decks, slick with ice, make every step a careful negotiation between balance and disaster. Men move like ghosts, their breaths pluming in the frozen air, eyes squinting against the glare of endless snow. The ship itself, a wooden beast, moans under the weight of ice, accumulating on its rigging and hull. The frosts thickens day by day, weighing down the sails and threatening to snap the masts like twigs. The crew fights a constant battle to chip away the ice, hands numbed beyond feeling but driven by the necessity of survival. Rations dwindle with cruel speed. Salted meat turns tough and tasteless. Hardtack, once the backbone of the diet, becomes as brittle as the ice around them. The men's stomachs grumble louder than the wind. Desperation begins to tighten its grip. In this void of sustenance, some men turn to the unthinkable. Leather boots, once a tool of protection against the elements, become a last resort food source. Boiling the boots was a grim ritual, scouring away mud and salt, soaking them in seawater, then simmering the leather until the fibers softened enough to be torn and chewed. The taste was a sharp reminder of their predicament, bitter, acrid, almost metallic. But the body is cunning. It absorbs what it can, holding on to every scrap of energy. Beyond the physical hardship, the psychological toll was immense. The constant cold blurred the lines between day and night, hope and despair. Men talked less, their voices hoarse whispers in the biting wind. Some curled into themselves, their minds retreating from the bleak landscape to memories of warmer days and homes they might never see again. Yet amid this frozen hell, the whalers pressed on. They hunted the leviathans beneath the ice, the massive whales whose oil promised wealth to those who returned. Each successful hunt was a flicker of light in the endless night, a reminder that survival was possible. But survival demanded sacrifices of comfort, sanity, and sometimes humanity itself. The Arctic is a world suspended between life and death, a realm where the simplest tasks become epic struggles. The cold doesn't just freeze flesh, it numbs the soul. Morning on the ship begins, not with light or warmth, but with a metallic scrape of frost being chipped from the rigging, the brittle crack of ice breaking against wooden beams, and the crunch of frozen boots on the deck thick with rime. Each breath hangs in the air like a ghost, a fleeting wisp of warmth quickly swallowed by the unforgiving wind. Below deck, the cramped quarters offer little relief. The air is stale, mingled with the smell of damp wool and unwashed body. The men huddle in their hammocks, bodies tangled with frostbite and fatigue. Every movement requires effort, like trying to swim through molasses. Food supplies have long since run low. Salted pork and ship's biscuit are memories more than meals. With no fresh provisions, the men's bodies rebel, muscles weakening, joints aching. Scurvy whispers at the edges, a slow thief of life. And then there's the leather boots. In desperation, the crew turns to these once sturdy shields against the elements. Now they're bitter salvation. The boots are scraped clean of any dirt, soaked until the leather becomes pliable, then boiled down in whatever pots remain. The once proud footwear dissolves into a grisly broth, thick and bitter, yet strangely nourished. Eating the boots is more than just survival, it's a psychological blow. Every bite, a reminder of how far they've fallen from civilization, from the warmth of hearth and home. The leather tastes of salt and sweat, with an undertone of despair. Yet, there is a strange camaraderie in this shared misery. Men sit around the pots, passing rationed portions, voices low and gravelly. They share stories, some true, some exaggerated tales, of hunts and close calls, of family and forgotten loves. The stories weave a fragile thread of humanity through the cold void. Outside, the hunt never stops. The ice may cage the whales, but it does not defeat the men's relentless pursuit. Every sighting sparks a flurry of activity. Boats are lowered, ropes readied, harpoons grasped. The men row through icy waters, muscles screaming, faces stinging from the spray and cold. The chase is brutal. Whales thrash and dive, the sea churns white with spray and foam. Men risk everything on each strike, knowing that a single mistake could mean a plunge into the freezing abyss. Victories are hard won, often overshadowed by loss. Boats capsize, men lost to the sea, bones numbed by the cold. Back on board, the whale is butchered with practiced efficiency. The blubber is sliced into thick strips, oily and slick. It is rendered down into oil, the lifeblood of the voyage, a precious commodity that keeps the ship afloat financially. But the scent of boiling blubber mixes with the stench of sweat, fear, and desperation. It clings to the men like a second skin. The Arctic does not forgive, it does not forget. The days blend into endless twilight, the sun barely skimming the horizon before sinking back beneath the ice. Shadows stretch long and cold across the deck, the cold seeping into every bone, every muscle. A slow poison no man can outrun. Each breath freezes in your lungs like shards of glass, and every step risks slipping on ice glazed with a thin sheen of frost. The ship creaks and moans, a weary beast groaning under the weight of the Arctic's unforgiving embrace. Men move slowly, their bodies weighted with exhaustion and cold. Every task a battle of will against the biting wind that cuts like a knife. The lookout's cry pierces the frozen silence. Whale sighted, starboard bow. A flicker of adrenaline surges through the crew brief, fierce, like a flame, struggling to hold back the dark. The boats are lowered with painstaking care, each rope groaning as it fights gravity and frost. The oars splash into the ice-choked water, sending shards of cold spray that sting like nettles. Rowing through the Arctic waters is like dragging your soul through a furnace of ice. Muscles scream, lungs burn, fingers numb and clumsy around the oar handles. The sky above is a slate gray, the horizon a jagged line of ice floes that seem to stretch into eternity. The whale, a shadow beneath the waves, moves with terrifying grace. It breaches, sending a thunderous roar, echoing off the ice cliffs, a sound that reverberates through the bones and into the marrow. The chase is a savage ballet, the men and beast locked in a deadly rhythm of pursuit and evasion. Harpoons fly, ropes coil, the boat jerks violently as the whale fights for its life. Water churns red with blood and spray, the air thick with salt and sweat. Men shout commands, curse in pain, struggle to hold on. Each strike is a gamble, a rope snap, a falling comrade, a plunge into the icy depths. But even in the heart of the chaos, there is a strange but yet harsh, brutal grace, born of survival. Back on the ship, the men haul the carcass alongside, the scent of blubber and blood filling the frozen air. The deck becomes a hive of activity, men slicing into the whale's thick flesh with knives that gleam cold and sharp. The blubber peels away in thick sheets, slick and glistening. The tripods are stoked, fire crackling beneath iron cauldrons as the blubber renders into precious oil. The heat pushes back the cold, but only slightly. Men sweat through frozen clothes, their faces streaked with soot and grime. As the oil boils, the ship hums with life a fleeting reprieve from the Arctic's endless grasp. At night, the cold seeps back in, creeping beneath wood and bone. The men huddle in their hammocks, bodies pressed together for warmth, dreams haunted by ice and loss. The silence is broken only by the creak of the ship and the distant howl of the wind. Tomorrow will bring the same relentless struggle, the same unforgiving fight against the frozen sea. A constant battle, a relentless pursuit, a cold and merciless world. The days stretch on, indistinguishable from each other, a grey blur of ice and sea. The men move like ghosts aboard the ship, shadows hunched against the cold. Their faces are etched with fatigue, eyes sunken but sharp, scanning the horizon for any sign of life in the vast white wilderness. At times, the Arctic's cruel beauty shows itself, the shimmering dance of the northern lights casting ethereal colors across the sky, fleeting and haunting like a whispered promise. But such moments are brief reprieves, swallowed quickly by the endless cold and the grinding routine. Below decks, the air is thick with damp and the mingled smells of sweat, oil, and brine. The hammocks swing silently as men sleep fitfully, dreams haunted by frozen waters and distant homes. Letters scribbled hurriedly by candlelight tell stories of loved ones left behind, a lifeline to a world that seems impossibly far away. On deck, every movement is measured. The smallest mistake could send a man plunging into the icy sea, a fate worse than death. The ship groans under the weight of ice that clings like a second skin, each creak a reminder of nature's relentless pressure. The whale oil, lifeblood of the voyage, fills barrels that clang dully against each other in the hold. It's a precious commodity, worth more than gold in these frozen wastes, and men work tirelessly to extract every drop, every glimmer of warmth. But the Arctic never forgets. Storms can rise without warning, whipping the sea into a frenzy of waves that batter the ship's hull. Ice floes shift and crack, threatening to crush the fragile vessel. And the cold always, the cold seeps into every crack and crevice, a slow, creeping enemy. Yet the men endure, bound by duty, desperation, and the faint hope that this brutal journey will one day end. But they might return to sunlit shores, to warmth and comfort. Until then, the ice holds them fast. A constant struggle, a fight against the frozen void, a story carved in ice and oil. And you, listening now, would you have lasted a day? New Bedford awakens. The elite's kingdom, the morning dawns over New Bedford with a quiet that's almost reverent, the sort of hush before the heavy grind of the day begins. You can hear the faint splash of waves lapping against the wooden piers, the creak of ropes as ships gently sway at anchor, and the distant clatter of shutters being thrown open by merchants, eager to start another day of commerce. New Bedford is no grand metropolis, but to the eyes of the 17th century, it is a promising gateway, a gateway to fortunes earned in the blood-stained waters of the Atlantic. The town's streets are a patchwork of cobblestones and dirt paths, lined with clapboard houses, some weather-beaten and sagging, others sturdier and freshly painted, proudly flaunting signs of wealth. A handful of stately brick buildings, home to the merchant elite, rise like islands amidst the modest dwellings of fishermen and dockhands. The smell of salt water hangs thick in the air, mingling with a faint scent of smoke from cooking fires and the more pungent aroma of fish markets preparing for the day astray. Children dart between legs of sailors and traders, weaving through barrels and crates like miniature mariners navigating a busy harbor. At the heart of this small port town, the merchants gather in their imposing offices, spaces that smell of polished wood, ink, and tobacco. Their eyes scanned ledgers and correspondence, their fingers tracing the lines of contracts that will send ships out across the treacherous ocean, chasing shadows beneath the waves. For these men, the sea is a ledger of risk and reward, not a place of danger or hardship. They sip thick, black coffee or watered-down ale, speaking in hushed tones about the latest whale oil prices in London, the cost of outfitting a new vessel, or the politics that shape trade routes. Their clothes are fine and their hands free from their lives lived comfortably on the backs of those who brave the cold and the deep. But just beyond the polished windows, the docks thrum with the hard labor of sailors, preparing for another voyage. Men who live in clothes who wrestle with ropes, as stiff as iron, and faces weathered to leather by wind and spray. They are shadows in this bustling world, their stories marked not in gold coins, but in scars and sweat. This is New Bedford, a town poised on the edge of two worlds, one of wealth and ease, the other of endless toil and danger. And it is this delicate balance, this shadowy exchange, that fuels the engine of the whaling empire. How New Bedford's elite profited from blood. The hidden cost behind the whale oil boom. The streets of New Bedford in the 17th century weren't tea-lined with gold coins or the glitter of easy fortune. Instead, they were coated with the sweat and blood of men who never saw their names in print or their faces in the town's history books. The elite, however, knew exactly what they were doing. Behind the polished storefronts and the stately mansions that rose from the salty docks, a ruthless economic engine churned, one fueled by the relentless harvest of the sea's leviathans. Whale oil was liquid gold. It powered lamps, lubricated machinery, and made fortunes for those who controlled its trade. The captains who sailed out, the crews who risked their lives on the icy waves, and the shipbuilders who crafted vessels were all cogs in a machine designed to enrich the few. The merchants who owned the ships wielded vast influence, often controlling entire fleets with paper and contracts rather than sails and harpoons. Their wealth grew not just from the oil, but from the strict control of prices, the monopolizing of key shipping routes, and the clever manipulation of supply to keep demand and prices high. But this wealth was shadowed by grim realities. Crewmen were often paid poorly, their shares of the haul barely enough to keep them afloat, after debts to suppliers and shipowners were insurance and provisioning fees ate away at what little remained. Meanwhile, the elite lived in relative comfort, investing their profits into land, taverns, and the mercantile networks that would solidify their grip for generations. Their opulent homes overlooked the same waters where men risked frostbite, scurvy, and death for a fraction of the gains. Laws and contracts were designed to protect these interests, ensuring that risk fell on the crews, while reward flowed upward. Debt peonage was common. Men signed on with no choice, bound to a cycle of poverty from which escape was nearly impossible. The social divide was stark. While some families prospered, many others struggled. Their fates tied irrevocably to the success of the whaling ventures controlled from those grand houses. This is the story not often told. The shadow behind the shine, the hidden cost beneath the bounty of the whale oil boom. The town ashore, a different world. Imagine stepping off the creaking whaling ship, boots touching solid earth after months at sea. The salt air mingles with something new, the smell of wood smoke, cooking fires, and fresh rain on cobblestone streets. Welcome to New Bedford, a whaling town, alive with activity and simmering tensions. While the men face the brutal life aboard ship, the wives, children, and elderly carry a different burden ashore. The town's rhythm is dictated by the tides of the whaling industry, yet the day-to-day is filled with its own struggles and subtle power plays. The women who waited behind every captain and harpooner was a wife waiting in a narrow, drafty house, often raising children alone for months or years at a time. These women managed households on shoestring budgets, tended gardens, repaired clothing, and kept the community's fragile social fabric intact. Many became skilled businesswomen, running small shops, boarding houses, or taking in laundry. Their labor, though invisible to the men chasing whales, was crucial. Some women took to writing letters that would comfort husbands at sea. Others became keepers of town gossip and law, wielding influence in salons and churches. But life was harsh. Loss was common. Men never guaranteed to return. Ships lost to storms or whales too powerful to conquer. Widowhood was frequent. Poverty a lurking shadow. Children learned early the weight of absence. The elite and the divide at the same time. New Bedford had an elite class, ship owners, merchants, and financiers whose wealth was built on blood, sweat, and oil. They lived in large, well-appointed homes, attended social clubs, and funded the churches and schools. Their names appeared on town charters and shipping manifests. This elite profited handsomely, investing in ships, oil markets, and infrastructure. Yet their riches often masked the dangers and misery experienced by those who actually sailed the ships. Social stratification was stark, with the wealthy wielding power over working-class families. The divide shaped everything from housing quality to education to access to justice. Life in the whaling town on the streets. The sounds of daily life were a mix of wagon wheels, blacksmiths, hammer, children's laughter, and church bells. Markets bustled with fishmongers, coopers, and tanners, all connected in the intricate web of whaling's economy. Local taverns served as hubs for news, deals, and drink. Stories of daring hunts and tragic losses passed from mouth to mouth, binding the community through shared experience and grief. Yet, even in this lively town, the specter of the sea's dangers hung heavy. Men departed for years, and those who returned carried ghosts and scars both visible and hidden. The rhythm ashore was no less relentless than at sea. Different battles, same survival. Whaling's economic web, the town's lifeblood and its costs. Beyond the daily hustle of New Bedford streets lay a complex economic web woven tightly around the whaling industry. This web connected sailors, ship owners, merchants, craftsmen, and even distant markets hungry for whale oil. Understanding this web means seeing how the town thrived and how many paid dearly for that prosperity. At the center were the ship owners and investors. These men often never left the docks, but controlled fortunes by financing, buying oil, and selling it in global markets. Their offices brimmed with ledgers, charts, and correspondence. Each successful voyage meant massive profits. Each loss, devastating setbacks. The crews were usually paid on a lay system, a share of the profits, rather than a fixed wage. This system incentivized hard work, but also placed immense financial uncertainty on sailors and their families. A long voyage might bring riches, or it might bring nothing but exhaustion and debt. Supporting the fleet were countless local tradespeople, coopers who made barrels for storing oil, blacksmiths who forged tools and repaired rigging, carpenters who kept ships seaworthy. These craftspeople thrived in times of plenty, but suffered when whaling The oil itself was a commodity with its own journey, extracted in tripods aboard ships, then transported ashore, stored in massive barrels, and finally sold at auction. Whale oil fueled lamps, lubricated machinery, and even became an ingredient in early plastics and cosmetics. This demand kept the industry yet, beneath a booming economy was a shadow ecologically strain on whale populations, financial risks borne by the less fortunate, and social divides hardened by wealth disparities. The elite's influence on politics and society. The town's wealthy elite exerted significant influence beyond commerce. They shaped local politics, funding candidates and policies that protected their interests. They built grand churches, schools, and libraries, cementing their legacy and status. Their philanthropy, while genuine in parts, also served as a social control mechanism, reinforcing hierarchies and expectations. Charity was often conditional, rewarding conformity and loyalty. Meanwhile, the working class juggled survival with limited political power. Their voices were quieter in town meetings, but their labor made the entire system possible. A community built on whale oil was a fragile balance of power, prosperity, and Beach Pod dependent on the others, but separated by wide gulfs. The social fabric beneath the surface, beneath the veneer of commerce and hierarchy, lay a community bound by shared hardship, resilience, and culture. New Bedford was not just a place of money and power, it was home to families, friendships, rituals, and stories that stitched the town together in a delicate, human tapestry. Many families were connected by generations of whalers. Sons followed fathers to sea, learning early the rituals of rope work, the call of the lookout, and the unspoken code of the hardships ashore, the weighing, the worry, the long absences were felt deeply, but accepted as part of life. Churches and social clubs served as centers of support and social life. On Sundays, the streets filled with the sounds of hymns, prayers, and quiet conversations. Beneath this calm was a sense of community that buoyed people through loss and uncertainty. But there was also tension. Racial divides existed in New Bedford, with African American sailors and workers contributing heavily to the industry, yet often relegated to lower-paying jobs and excluded from full social participation. Women, too, faced their own struggles, managing households alone for months or years at a time, taking on work where possible, and coping with the emotional weight of the sea's dangers. The waiting wives and families became pillars of strength and endurance, their lives a constant echo of the phrase "a constant struggle." Their stories are often overshadowed, but no less vital to the town's heartbeat. A legacy carved in stone and memory today. New Bedford's streets still whisper the tales of those who lived, worked, and dreamed by the sea. The old warehouses and docks stand as monuments to a time when whale oil lit lamps worldwide and shaped the town's destiny. Museums and memorials preserve the artifacts and stories, scrimshaw carvings, ship logs, faded photographs, a reminder of the lives tethered to the ocean's vast, unpredictable expanse. As you imagine this town, with its wealth and hardship, its triumphs and tragedies, let yourself settle into the rhythm of its days. Hear the creak of timbers, the laughter of children, the distant shouts from the docks. Feel the pulse of a community shaped by the sea, forever marked by the whales they chased and the lives they led. The 1636 Dutch disaster and its cannibal aftermath. Deep dive into one of the most harrowing and humanly raw episodes in whaling history. The sea's grim embraced. Imagine, once again, the boundless expanse of the 17th century Atlantic. Endless grey skies stretching to meet the waves. A world where the horizon blurs, and the sea's moods shift without warning. Ships venture out, driven by the promise of whale oil and profit, unaware that nature's cruel hand is waiting just beyond the swell. In 1636, a Dutch whaling fleet set sail with ambition and hope, their wooden hulls creaking with the promise of bounty. But the sea can be both provider and executioner, and for these men, it became a merciless judge, a storm brooder, slow, dark threat that swallowed the sky and churned the waves. The ships were caught unprepared, their sails ragged and crews exhausted. The wind howled like a beast, and waves towered, smashing into decks with a power that seemed to tear the very soul from the wood. One by one, the ships were battered, flung apart, or grounded on jagged rocks, hidden beneath the furious surf. Men were thrown into the chaos, grappling with ropes, clutching at splinters, fighting the cold water that threatened to pull them down. Those who survived the initial disaster found themselves stranded on a bleak, rocky shore, miles from any hope of rescue. Food was gone, Warmth was a distant memory. The cold gnawed into their bones. And so, a desperate will took hold, the will to survive at any cost. The tides of desperation in this stark landscape of salt, stone, and broken timber. A terrible choice loomed. Hunger clawed at stomachs like a wild animal, stealing reason and hope. Men, once comrades in the hunt for whales, were now cast into a struggle against themselves and each other. The chronicles tell of silence broken only by the crackle of fire and whispered prayers. They tell of watchful eyes scanning the horizon for a ship that might never come, and of whispers darker still, the slow descent into the unthinkable. Cannibalism, the taboo carved deep into human consciousness, became the last refuge for survival. Flesh was consumed in shadows and secrecy, a grim pact made between men against the sea and fate. Yet even in this darkness, humanity flickered. Men shared the last scraps, spoke words of forgiveness and sorrow, and clung to memories of home and loved ones. The sea had taken much, but it could not entirely claim their souls. The cold that bites to the bone, the frozen breath of winter wrapped the survivors like a shroud. Nights were endless, stretching into a silence so thick it pressed into the marrow. Each man's breath came in ragged clouds, mingling with the sharp tanks of salt and decay. The wind whispered mournful songs through jagged cliffs, carrying the hollow echoes of lost souls. Shelters were cobbled together from driftwood and torn sails, but comfort was a cruel joke. Every hour brought new aches, frostbitten fingers, and the gnawing terror of another day without sustenance. The men huddled close, but even warmth shared was not enough to hold back the creeping night. Survival became a ritual of small victories, finding a stray seabird, catching a fish with bare hands, scraping seaweed from the rocks. Yet the ocean, once a source of livelihood, now loomed as a cold, indifferent giant. Indifferent to the plight of these desperate men, broken bodies and shattered spirits dotted the shore, testament to the unforgiving power of nature and the human will pushed to its limits. Every night, some slipped quietly into the sea's embrace, their passing marked only by a ripple or a whispered prayer. The flicker of hope, among the despair, a flicker of hope endured. Rumors of passing ships, distant voices carried on the wind, and the faintest glimmers of rescue kept them tethered to life. Men scavenged, searched, and prayed, each heartbeat a defiance against the dark. One of the survivors, a young sailor named Peter, kept a journal in secret, carving words into scraps of wood. His account spoke not just of suffering, but of camaraderie, the small acts of kindness that kindled light in the darkest hours. He wrote of the quiet strength of the older men who shared their last morsels, and of the young who whispered songs of home to keep despair at bay. This was not merely a tale of survival, it was a testament to the endurance of the human spirit amidst unimaginable horror. The harrowing decisions of hunger as days dragged on, and the pit of hunger grew ever deeper. The survivors faced choices no man should ever have to make. The frozen land offered little nourishment. With no supplies left, desperation crept in like a cold shadow. Whispers spread among the men, rumors of a grim solution that tested the boundaries of morality and survival. When the line between life and death blurs, instincts sharpen in unexpected ways. They began to turn to each other's fallen bodies, a chilling reality no one spoke of openly. Flesh, once unthinkable, became sustenance in the relentless cold. Each bite was a bitter reminder of what had been lost, but also a fierce refusal to surrender entirely. Though unspoken, this act shaped the very fabric of their existence on that icy shore, a testament to the brutal will to live. Spirits fractured and forged. The horrors shared forged bonds stronger than any steel. Men who had once been strangers became family, bound by tragedy and the daily struggle to hold on to sanity. They gathered around meager fires, sharing stories of home and dreams they might never see again. Laughter, fragile as it was, surfaced amid the tears. Yet beneath the surface, shadows lingered. Guilt gnawed at the edges of hope, and fear whispered that salvation might come too late. Tensions flared, but the knowledge that unity was their only chance held them together. Rescue on the horizon. After what felt like an eternity, the desperate watch paid off. A distant silhouette, a speck of salvation, appeared on the horizon. The arrival of a passing ship brought a surge of emotion, relief, joy, sorrow. Survivors were ferried aboard, fragile and broken, but alive. Though scars both visible and hidden would mark them forever, the memory of those the aftermath and legacy. Once the battered survivors limped back to port, Their arrival was met with a mixture of relief, AEW, and an unspoken dread. They weren't welcomed as heroes. No banners waved or triumphant cheers filled the docks. Instead, they returned as living shadows of the abyss, their eyes hollow from the horrors endured. The whispers that followed were as cold as the ocean, bristales of desperation, starvation, and a taboo so profound it unsettled even the hardest sailors. Cannibalism, that unspoken scar etched into their souls, clung to their reputations like a relentless ghost. The men carried not just physical scars, but the weight of judgment that followed them ashore. Society, shackled by the moral codes of the time, struggled to reconcile the act of survival with the unthinkable means by which it was achieved. Some survivors were met with suspicion, others with pity, but few with understanding. In the quiet corners of taverns and the dim light of harborside inns, these stories were recounted in hushed tones. The survivors themselves were forced to balance the burden of recounting their ordeal without opening the floodgates to shame and scorn. Many chose silence, locking away their memories in the deepest chambers of their minds, where no one could pry. Yet, the legacy of the disaster permeated whaling culture like a dark undertow. Ship captains grew ever more cautious, provisioning their vessels with a grim seriousness. New protocols emerged not just for navigation and hunting, but for human endurance and care. The grim necessity of survival was etched into every decision. Every ration counted with an almost reverential precision. Beyond the practical, the event became a somber legend, a moral compass for those who dared to hunt the leviathans of the sea. Writers and historians later chronicled the tale, weaving it into the fabric of maritime lore. It stood as a stark reminder. The ocean's bounty was never free. Every drop of oil, every bale of blubber was paid for in sweat, blood, and sometimes unspeakable sacrifice. And as the waves endlessly rolled against the shore, so too did the story ripple through generations, an testament to human resilience and the fragile line between survival and surrender. The broader ripple effects. How the disaster shaped whaling and society. The 1636 Dutch disaster didn't just leave scars on the men who survived. Its shockwaves reached far beyond the wooden planks of that doomed ship. The incident became a cautionary tale whispered in taverns, discussed in shipyards, and debated in the chambers of port city councils. It exposed the perilous reality of whaling, one that was far messier and more fragile than the romanticized tales of conquest and adventure often spun ashore. Shipbuilders began to reconsider their designs, looking for ways to make vessels sturdier and more resilient against the violent moods of the sea. Captains, once relying heavily on sheer bravado and luck, started to emphasize preparation and prudence, implementing stricter rationing systems and emergency protocols. The tragedy was a brutal teacher, forcing a re-examination of the very culture of whaling. In coastal communities, the disaster stirred a complex mix of fear and fascination. Families who depended on the sea for their livelihoods found themselves caught between pride in their hardy ancestors and dread of the oceanism. The idea that survival sometimes required acts that defied societal norms created an undercurrent of unease, quietly influencing attitudes towards whalers for decades. Merchants and ship owners, those faceless puppeteers of the industry, faced increased pressure to improve conditions not out of newfound compassion, but because of well-provisioned, slowly, the harshest corners of the trade softeners, with incremental changes aimed at preventing future calamities. Culturally, the disaster seeped into the arts and literature, inspiring poems and ballads that portrayed the sea not just as a place of bounty, but of bitter sacrifice. These works, tinged with melancholy and reverence, kept the memory of the tragedy alive in collective consciousness, serving as both a warning and a tribute. Above all, the 1636 disaster underscored a harsh truth. The ocean was an indifferent master, and those who dared to harvest its giants did so at great personal risk. Their stories, whether of heroism or horror, wove together into the complex tapestry of maritime history, reminders of the fragile human spirit facing the vast, unknowable wild. The rise of New Bedford. From fishing village to whaling powerhouse, close your eyes again. Imagine a small coastal village, a cluster of wooden homes, and rickety docks nestled beside the restless Atlantic. This is New Bed, early 18th century, just another fishing town struggling against the endless tides and salty wind. The boats bob gently in the harbor, weathered fishermen haul in their nets, and the smell of salt, seaweed, and fish fills the air. The people here know the sea intimately, its moods, its dangers, and its promises. But their lives are quiet, modest, shaped by daily survival. Now, Picture the slow turning of a great wheel, as word spreads of a new treasure far beneath the waves. Whales, enormous creatures who yield oil that lights lamps and lubricates machines in distant cities. This oil is gold. The world's hunger for it is insatiable. Slowly, New Bedford's harbor fills with bigger ships, sleek vessels built for endurance and long voyages. The village hums with new energy. Merchants arrive, their pockets heavy with coins and ledgers. They see not fish but barrels of whale oil. Wealth begins to trickle into town, first in small streams, then in rushing rivers. Whaling captains return, sunburnt and worn, but triumphant. The town's rough docks transform into a bustling port. Wooden shacks give way to warehouses and workshops. Streets widen. Houses grow taller and finer. At the heart of this transformation is a rising elite. Men who invest in ships, who finance expeditions, who manage crews from their offices and parlors. They are a new class, the merchants and their fortunes are tied to the ocean's dark bounty. They hold meetings in candlelit rooms, poring over charts and contracts, deciding which voyages will launch next. Their power grows as the town becomes a center of commerce, a hub in a global trade network fueled by whale oil. Yet, beneath this prosperity, the sailors prepare to depart again. Their lives are hard, unpredictable, but to the elite, the sea is a business. Cold, calculated, and profitable. The harsh realities behind the merchant's wealth. Expanded now, peer beyond the polished windows of New Bedford's grand merchant homes, beyond the gaslit streets and bustling wharfs lined with barrels. Beneath this gleaming surface lies a world where fortune is forged not in gold, but in hardship and human costs, paid in broken bodies, shattered dreams, and silent suffering. The merchant classed the men in their frock coats, velvet waistcoats, and powdered wigs set comfortably in their offices, poring over ledgers and charts, plotting the next whaling voyage. Their wealth is built on numbers. Barrels of whale oil, tons of baleen, prices set by distant markets. These are the figures that matter to them, the profits that fill their coffers. But the ledger hides a darker ledger altogether. Beneath the ink and parchment, the real costs are etched in salt sore hands, frostbitten feet, and cracked ribs of the men who do the work. The whalers, those who sign on his hands or laymen, are promised a share, but that share is as unpredictable as the sea itself. Advances are few and far between, and often the men are left in debt after paying for their own clothing, food, and equipment out of their wages. Picture a crew of weather-beaten sailors, far from home for months, sometimes years, living in cramped, foul-smelling quarters below deck. They endure biting, cold, endless storms, and a relentless work schedule that leaves no room for rest. Provisions are often poor. Salt, pork, hard as a rock, biscuits crawling with weevils, and water that tastes of the barrels it's stored in. There is no doctor aboard most vessels, and disease spreads quickly through the tight quarters. A man with a simple infection can quickly descend into fever, delirium, and death. The ship-ass surgeon, when there is one, is often an ill-trained barber or tradesman with a crude kit and little knowledge. Yet, back in New Bedford, these realities are invisible. The merchants calculate profits, not pain. A ship returning laden with barrels means money in the bank. A failed voyage means only delayed dividends. The risks to human life are abstracted into figures on paper. Contracts signed by sailors often read like riddles. Complicated agreements full of legalese, promises that dissolve upon rough seas. Many men never see the full pay they were promised, instead receiving scraps after debts and expenses are Some crews are paid in lay, a percentage of profits that depends entirely on the ship's successor lottery where the odds are never in their favor. The social chasm between merchant and sailor yawns wide. While the town's elite invest in mansions, new docks, and political influence, the sailors dwell in boarding houses or cramped quarters, nursing wounds and longing for a shore that never quite feels like home. Yet the sea calls back those men, again and again. Economic hardship on land, lack of alternatives, and the lure of the voyage dangerous. Yes, but offering a chance at a better share keep them signing on. The merchants rely on this cycle, sending ships out year after year after harsh year. Behind every barrel of oil, every baleen comb, is a story of struggle. The merchants' fortunes rise on a tide of silent sacrifice, the voices of men lost in the roar of waves and the creak of timbers. The wealth of New Bedford's elite is not simply earned, it is extracted. relentlessly and without mercy, from the bones and blood of those who dared the ocean's cruel embrace. As the days lengthened in New Bedford's bustling harbor, the whaling ships came and went like clockwork, each laden with barrels of precious whale oil, liquid gold for the lamps that lit cities and homes far inland. Behind the sturdy docks and smoke-streaked rooftops, however, a less visible world pulsed, fueled by profit and powered by a web of social hierarchies. The city's elite ship owners, merchants, and investors sat comfortably in their grand homes, their wealth swelling with every voyage's success, while the laborers, sailors, and their families bore the brunt of the toil, danger, and loss. In these elite circles, discussions rarely dwelt on the grueling realities aboard the ships. Instead, the talk was of dividends, markets, and the ever-growing demand for whale oil. This demand was not just for lamps. It fueled the candle-making industries, lubricants for the burgeoning machinery of the early industrial revolution, and even cosmetic products. The scale of the whaling economy stretched far beyond the docks, entwining New Bedford in a global network of commerce. Yet, for all this wealth, the human cost was steep and often obscured. Many sailors left the city never to return. Death at sea was common, whether from accidents, storms, disease, or the savage encounters with the great whales themselves. Widows and orphans lingered in the shadows of prosperity, relying on meager charity or the goodwill of local churches. The social safety nets were threadbare at best. Profits were carefully calculated, and investors took pains to ensure every cent was accounted for. Whaling was a speculative venture, with ship owners selling shares, much like stocks, dividing the financial risks and rewards. But those who took the biggest risks, the crews who faced the harpoons and brutal seas, received only a fraction of the bounty, often paid in portions of the oil or dried whale meat after expenses and debts were due. For many, the promise of riches remained just that, a promise. Meanwhile, the city's infrastructure itself evolved to support the growing trade. Warehouses rose, packing houses expanded, and the port's capacity increased to handle the vast flow of goods. Skilled craftsmen, carpenters, coopers, blacksmiths found steady work, maintaining the ships and crafting barrels for the oil. The stench of the rendering yards mingled with the salty air, a reminder of the price paid for the city's prosperity. Yet, the elite's wealth also enabled the funding of schools, churches, and public buildings, attempting to soften the harsh realities of whaling life with glimpses of civility and order. Philanthropy had its place, but it was also a way to maintain social stability, keeping the working classes dependent and controlled. This fragile balance between wealth and suffering, power and poverty, was the true engine behind New Bedford's rise. The gleaming barrels of oil in the harbor hid the blood, sweat, and sorrow that made them possible. For those who profited most, it was a calculated trade-off, one that history often overlooks. The everyday lives of New Bedford's elite were steeped in the trappings of success. Their homes were adorned with fine furniture, exotic fabrics, and intricate whaling artifacts collected from distant shores. These symbols of status were not mere decoration, they were badges of honor, proof of dominance over the harsh sea and the beasts within it. Hosting lavish dinners and social gatherings, these families displayed their wealth openly, reinforcing their place atop the social ladder. Yet beneath the polished surface lay a complex network of influence and control. The local government, often staffed by these same wealthy families, prioritized policies that protected their business interests. Zoning laws, port fees, and trade regulations were crafted to benefit the merchants and ship owners, ensuring that whaling remained the economic heart of the town. Public funds sometimes went toward improving infrastructure that directly supported the industry. Better docks, improved warehouses, and navigational aids. But these advancements came at a cost, one paid mostly by the workers. Sailors, coopers, riggers, and other laborers endured long hours and grueling conditions. Their wages barely enough to support families back home. Many sailors carried debts, either from outfitting their gear or from advances on their pay, which chained them to the ships even if the risks became too great. Desertion was harshly punished, but the desperation of some men outweighed the threat. The stark contrast between the elite's comfortable lives and the sailors' daily struggles highlighted the inequalities that defined New Bedford's society. It was a place where opportunity and exploitation existed side by side, a dual reality maintained by necessity and social convention. Women, too, played crucial but often overlooked roles in this ecosystem. Wives managed households and families in the prolonged absence of their husbands, often facing economic hardship and social isolation. Some ran boarding houses or small shops, supplementing family income in any way possible. Their resilience in community networks were vital threads holding the fabric of whaling society together. At the heart of this system lay a cold calculus. The relentless pursuit of profit overshadowed the human cost. It was an unspoken truth, accepted by many but acknowledged by few. For the elite, the wealth generated by blood and toil was justification enough to sustain the cycle, fueling New Bedford's golden age at sea. The profits from whaling filled the coffers of New Bedford's elite, but their influence extended beyond mere wealth accumulation. Many reinvested their fortunes into expanding the town's infrastructure and cultural institutions, shaping New Bedford into a hub of commerce and society. Libraries, churches, and schools received generous donations, but these contributions also served to reinforce social hierarchies only. Aristocracy truly benefited. At the docks, the elite maintained tight control over shipbuilding yards, supply chains, and insurance companies. Whaling voyages were expensive gambles, and insurance policies protected investors from total loss, though often at the expense of those who actually risked life and limb. Underwriters meticulously calculated risks, adjusting premiums based on the likelihood of disasters that regularly struck these ventures. The shipping agents and merchants, often family members of ship owners, dominated the flow of goods to and from the port. They negotiated prices for whale oil and baleen in distant markets, frequently manipulating supply to keep prices higher. This created a feedback loop. Higher profits at the top allowed for greater investment in more ships, perpetuating the cycle of expansion and exploitation. Meanwhile, laborers and sailors were left with scraps. Many never saw a fair share of the riches their toil generated. Contracts bound sailors to shares of the voyage's profits, but deductions for food, equipment, and other expenses frequently reduced their final pay to a pittance. The dangerous nature of the work and the isolation at sea meant that grievances rarely reached the ears of those in power. This system bred resentment and hardship, yet the social fabric held firm through a mix of tradition, necessity, and the shared belief in the whaling industry's centrality to their lives. Stories of fortune and adventure circulated in taverns and homes, keeping the dream alive even as the reality for many was one of struggle and sacrifice. In the quiet moments, away from the bustle of the docks and mansions, one could glimpse the cost of this prosperity. The scars borne by returning sailors, the tears of wives and children left behind, and the ghosts of those lost at sea whispered a darker tale beneath New Bedford's shining veneer. Scrimshaw and silence, art born of boredom at sea, unchanging hours between hunts. Imagine yourself not during the chaos of a whale hunt, nor in the brief respite of landfall, but in that in-between time, the great, yawning stretch of ours, where nothing seems to happen, too calm. The sails sag, listless, in the still air. The ship drifts slowly, creaking like an old man groaning in his sleep. You are adrift in a world that is both vast and suffocating. There is no schedule for these days, no predator to chase, no harpoon to wield. Only repetition, rope work, cleaning, rationing out, stale bread, climbing the mast just to keep your mind sharp. Sometimes, a crewman will speak of cabin fever, though no cabin could be lonelier than the open deck under an empty sky. The boredom isn't loud, it's quiet, like the sound of your own blood humming in your ears. It's a silence so deep, it starts to feel heavy, tangible, like another crew member standing beside you, whispering nothing. It is in this eerie quiet that Scrimshaw is born. Scrimshaw carved whalebone, or tooth-etched with knives, needle, or sailmakers or submergers not from a wellspring of joy or inspiration, but as a way to survive the passage of time, not to kill it, but to outlast it. It is a resistance to the slow erosion of self that comes from weeks at sea without anything to mark one day from the next. The materials come from the kill, whale teeth, jawbone, rib, polished with shark skin or ash and spit, soft enough to take a fine edge, hard enough to last forever. An ironic immortality, considering the fate of the animal it came from. You sit cross-legged near the stern, a tooth in hand, the tiny blade of a knife etching grooves with infinite patience. Around you, men mutter, hum, cough. The sails flap half-heartedly. Someone sharpens a hook, another stitches a sock. No one speaks unless there's a reason. Words are expensive out here, and still you carve. The first line is always the hardest. The tooth resists, slick with the residue of sea and smoke. Your hand trembles, not from fear, but from days of rope burn and cold salt wind. But then the line settles. Then another, and another, until, slowly, an image emerges, something from memory, or dream, or madness. Perhaps it's a portrait of a girl back home, or the swirling form of a whale or a sailor being dragged to the ocean floor in the coils of a sea serpent imagined. It doesn't matter. What matters is that it becomes a thing. A mark, a message scratched into time. A scrimshaw is not just decoration. It is the sailor's diary, a confession, a curse, a prayer. Tools of the bored and the damned. There is no official kit for a everything is makeshift, adapted from the brutal practicality of whaling life. Sail needles bent into hooks. Harpoon sharpening stones used to hone knife edges to dangerous precision. Blades once meant for gutting fish now used to carve the slope of a woman's cheek or the rigging of a ship. Ink is not purchased, it's brewed. Made from candle soot mixed with whale oil, or scraped charcoal stirred into rum. Some men use their own blood, just a few drops, mixed with ash and spit. It stains well, too well. These aren't artists with studios. These are men carving their thoughts into bone. While the deck rocks beneath their feet, each tooth or bone has to be prepared. First cleaned, then boiled to remove any lingering flesh or rot. Then smoothed off in using sand or pumice, or in desperate times, just rubbing it against the deck. The polished surface becomes a canvas, small and curved and unforgiving. To sketch her, a man might scratch the outline with a pin or an awl, barely breaking the surface. Then he deepens the cuts, tracing and retracing, until the grooves are deep enough to catch the ink. The final step is rubbing the ink into the carving, letting it settle, then wiping the excess away. What's left behind is not just image but permanence. Every line is a risk. There's no erasing, one slip, and the whole thing's ruined. So you carve slow, patient, focused. The other men might glance over your shoulder, nodding or scoffing. Some offer quiet approval, a grunt, maybe. Others mock it, calling it foolish, girlish, or worse. But you carve anyway, because it's something that is yours. In a world where everything else, your food, your hammock, even your breath belongs to the ship. Scrimshaw was often traded. Among the crew, it might earn you a favor. An extra biscuit, a turn off the watch, a half swallow of someone else's rum. Some pieces were saved for the return home, meant as gifts for wives or children who barely remembered the man who left. The finest pieces, though, were never given away. They stayed hidden, wrapped in oilcloth, tucked deep into sea chests, carried from voyage to voyage, not out of vanity, but reverence, like talismans, like proof. Proof that you were more than labor, more than salt, more than another name on the crew list. You were a man who made something, even if it was just a story carved into dead bone. Scenes etched in bone. Close your eyes and picture it. A yellowing whale tooth, palm-sized and smooth, etched with a schooner in full sail. Every line of rigging drawn with aching care. Waves curl beneath the keel like wood shavings. Above, gull's wheel in the sky, never seen by the carver in months, but still remembered. Still missed. This is Scrimshaw. Not just art, not just craft. It's memory, longing, a man's world, reduced to the things he can still control. Most carvings fell into familiar categories: sailing ships, of course, always the ship. Sometimes drawn from life, sometimes embellished into fantasy, the way prisoners paint castles they've never seen. Flags fly higher, the sea calms. The sky is always fair. Then there were the women, always exaggerated, always idealized. Bare-bosomed sirens, hourglass waists, eyes too large and knowing. Most of these men hadn't seen a woman in months, maybe years, so they carved what they remembered, or thought they remembered, or imagined. Some depicted home, a farmhouse, a child, a dog on a hill, a church steeple in the distance, corn stalks in rows, a porch, a tree with a swing. These were carved with a tenderness that no woman at sea would ever witness. Soft lines, gentle curves. They weren't just drawings, they were whispers. Occasionally a man would carve a whale, not as a hunter might see it, but as something grand, regal, even sacred. Massive heads, impossible tails, eyes full of depth. It's ironic, of course. A killer rending his prey in reverence. But at sea, contradictions are daily bread. Some pieces told full stories, sequences carved like panels of a silent comic. A whale hunt, blow by blow, a storm, a mutiny, a death. These pieces were rare mostly because they required time, skill, and space. But they were the closest thing these men had to journals, or confessionals. It's worth noting what Scrimshaw rarely included. The violin. You almost never see the harpoon entering the whale, or the flensers at work. The blood, the cries, the chaos all left unspoken, like nightmares too raw to name. Instead, Scrimshaw became a form of a man's past, cleaned up, his fears made manageable, his sins, if not forgiven, at least and then that silenced. The silence of the work, the silence of the finished piece. There's more truth than the words they never wrote. Bone, blade, and patience. Scrimshaw wasn't glamorous. It wasn't even sanctioned, half the time. It was a pastime born of scraps of refuse. Whale teeth, jawbones, walrus tusks. If you were lucky, or the occasional shard of sea-worn ivory if you happened to sail too far north. These weren't precious objects when they began. They were leftovers. Discards, but men made them sing. The basic tools were crude: a sail needle, a jackknife, a rusty file, maybe a bent nail, ground sharp against a stone. There was no proper studio, no desk, just a knee for balance and a sliver of bone gripped between calloused fingers. Sometimes the blade slipped, sometimes the fingers bled. Ink was improvised, lampblack, mixed with whale oil, soot scraped from the underside of the tripod's tobacco juice, gunpowder and spit. Anything dark, anything staining. The image would be scratched shallow, then rubbed with this dark slurry until the design held. There was no second chance. If a line curved the wrong way, or a detail came out wrong, the man had two choices: start over, or live with a mistake. Most lived with it. Mistakes became part of the piece, like scars. Carving was often done below deck during the long, sleepless hours. There wasn't much light. Candles were rationed, so the men worked by touch and habit, the blade moving gently, methodically. Sometimes you'd hear the scratch before you saw it, the soft rasp of steel on enamel. Like mice behind a wall, the work demanded stillness, and in that stillness, time slowed. It almost stopped. There was no wind in Scrimshaw, no creak of timber, no shouts, no blood, just the quiet, private rhythm of a man carving a world into a fragment of bone. It became a form of meditation, a ritual, something done not just to pass the time, but to hold it still. Because at sea, time could stretch cruelly. Days blurred, nights lengthened, and Scrimshaw became a way to anchor memory in place, to say, I was here, I saw this, I felt this, I made this. No one shouted over Scrimshaw. No one rushed it. Even the cruelest mates tended to leave the carvers alone, perhaps because they sensed, somewhere deep beneath the callousness, that this was sacred work. Not sacred in the way of gods and churches, but sacred like breathing, like surviving one more day in a place that seemed determined to forget you existed. What survived, and what didn't when the voyage ended months or years later. The Scrimshaw came home in sea chests, wrapped in rags or nestled between socks. Some pieces were gifted to sweethearts, or mothers, or left behind on tavern shelves as trade for drink, buried with their makers at sea, or tossed overboard when space grew tight. For many men, it was the only legacy they left behind. Their names might not appear in any ship log or church record. Their bones might lie in the belly of a whale or in some forgotten port half a world away. But the Scrimshaw remained, a silent testimonial, a sliver of ivory, covered in tiny, precise lines. Some were signed, most were not. But if you've ever held one a tooth etched with a ship rounding the horn, or a bone etched with the face of a woman likely drawn from memory, you've touched a story that words never told, and that is the odd poetry of it. The most enduring voices from these voyages came not from captains or logbooks or merchants tallying barrels of oil, but from the quiet men with tired hands and nothing but time. They weren't trained, they weren't celebrated, they weren't paid for their labor, but their hands found something to hold on to. Scrimshaw was never just hobby, it was defiance. It was a refusal to disappear completely. And though the world would soon industrialize, mechanize, forget, these tiny works remained, passed from hand to hand, collected in museums, sold at auctions, placed on dusty mantles. Their origins unknown to the people who inherited them, but to the men who made them, they were not art objects. They were anchors. To memory. To meaning. To something still, in a world that never stopped moving. So, the next time you see one, whether in a glass case or tucked into a shadowed corner of a shop, not to admire, but to remember that once, long ago, in a ship that stank of death and salt in time, a man sat still and carved a piece of himself into the world. And for a moment, at least, he was more than just a sailor. He was a witness. The smell that followed them home, the dockside return when the voyage finally ended weeks late, months overdue, or years vanished into a blur of horizon lines. The ship limped into harbor under sun-bleached sails. The ropes were stiff. The men were stiffer. And the ship, ... It wasn't just the usual smells of seawater and wood tar. This was something else. A heavier stink. A sour, burnt, clinging presence that turned heads long before the gangplank dropped. The townsfolk had a name for it. If not in words, then in glances, the whale's smell. Even if you were blind, you'd know a whaling ship had arrived. The scent wafted ahead of the crew like a warning. Tripods had been boiled too long and too often, saturating the very fibers of the deck. Whale oil had seeped into the pores of the wood. It coated boots and cuffs, found its way into the seams of coats, soaked into hair and under fingernails. No amount of soap could fix it. Some ports posted lookouts not for whales, but for the smell of whalers returning. When the men disembarked, they brought the sea with them. Not in stories or glory, but in the sticky film on their skin. People stepped aside in the street. Bartenders held their breath. Some wives washed their husbands in basins behind the house before letting them through the front door. There was joy of course, stares and kisses and homecoming meals. But even in those first embraces, something lingered. The smell had followed them home, and it did not leave easily. The body remembers. Even when the land does not, returning home was never just a matter of stepping off a ship and into normal life. There was no parade, no medals, no ceremony. For most whalermen, it was a quiet, lumbering disembarkation, like shadows peeling off the deck, unsure whether they belonged in sunlight. The town had changed. Children had grown taller. Shops had moved. Sometimes a neighbor was missing, or a new face sat on the porch next door. Even the cobblestones felt foreign underfoot. Drive, too, still. The land didn't roll beneath you like it used to. But the body still swayed. For days, maybe weeks. They walked like they were still at sea shoulders. Hunched slightly forward, knees flexed, just enough to catch the ship's imagined roll. They reached for ropes that weren't there, braced for winds that never came. Some awoke in the middle of the night, gripping the bed frame like a mast, sweating and confused, convinced the floor was listing. And the smell it came with them like a ghost. The oil had soaked into every callus, into every thread of their clothing. It clung to the scalp, to the bed sheets, to the very walls of their homes. A subtle reminder of what they had endured, and what they could never quite leave behind. Neighbors might not say it aloud, but they said it in sidelong glances. In the open window they shut when you passed. In the way shopkeepers handed over goods with an extra cloth between fingers. You were back, but you were not the same. The skin carries stories. The men who returned from months or years at sea often found their own bodies had become battlegrounds. The relentless exposure to saltwater oil and weather had left its marks. Cracked skin, deep calluses, and burns that refused to heal quickly. Their hands, once nimble and strong, now ached with arthritis or nerve-damaged, silent testimonies to the brutal labor they endured. More than that, their skin bore the scent of the whale oil, not just a smell but a physical residue that no amount of scrubbing could erase. It settled beneath their fingernails, in the creases of their knuckles, and even clung to the pores of their faces. Bathing was a temporary relief, but the smell was woven into their very pores. Sometimes, after a hard rain, the scent would rise anew, ghost-like. Restlessness at home, the monotony and quiet of land life, often felt suffocating to these men. After the unending rhythm of creaking timbers and crashing waves, the silence of their hometowns was deafening. Sleep was elusive, dreams haunted by the roar of whales and the hiss of boiling blubber. Their minds replayed moments of danger and brotherhood, sharp as the harpoons they'd wielded. Some turned to drink to dull the ache. Others withdrew into silence. Families noticed the change, once vibrant men, now distant, haunted, or quick to anger. The sea was a memory, but a living one, etched deep within their souls. A community divided back in whaling towns. returning sailors often found themselves caught between worlds. The town elite, ship owners, merchants, and investors viewed the sailors as tools to be used and discarded, heroes only, insofar as they brought back oil barrels filled with wealth. Meanwhile, ordinary townsfolk sometimes regarded returning sailors with suspicion or pity, wary of the smell and the stories they brought, tales of hardship, death, and desperation not fit for polite company. Thus, the men lived in a liminal space, belonging fully neither to sea nor shore, always carrying the weight of their voyages in body and spirit. Whale oil's grip on the senses. Even after thorough washing, the odor of whale oil lingered stubbornly. It clung to clothes, bedding, and the very air surrounding the men. The pungent, sickly sweet scent was a constant reminder not just of their toil, but of the death and decay from which it was drawn. Families often complained, reluctant to welcome these men into their homes. Children would wrinkle their noses and ask why Daddy always smelled so strange. Friends, too, sometimes kept a cautious distance, unable to shake the invisible cloud of grease and salt that seemed to hover around the returning sailors. This olfactory ghost was a social barrier as much as a physical one. Health consequences beyond the deck. Whale oil wasn't just foul-smelling, it was dangerous. Prolonged skin contact could cause rashes and sores, sometimes festering into infections in an age before antibiotics. Breathing in the smoke from tree pots and rendered blubber exposed men to noxious fumes. Chronic respiratory problems became common, persistent coughs and wheezing, signatures of a life spent too close to fire and fat. These ailments often worsened with time, the men suffering long after setting foot on solid ground. Their bodies bore invisible scars, silent witnesses to the price of the sea's bounty. A lasting psychological toll. The experience of hunting, killing, and processing such massive creatures was not just physically demanding, but mentally draining. Many men suffered what we would now recognize as post-traumatic anxiety, and moments of deep despair shadowed their days. Communities had no framework to support such wounds. Silence and stoicism were the only options. The phrase "a constant struggle" echoed not only at sea, but in the battles they fought within themselves. Once home, legacy and memory. Despite these hardships, the men's stories became woven into local folklore and family histories. Scrimshaw carvings, journals, and old photographs preserved glimpses of their world, a world of cold mornings, hard labor, and the persistent, stubborn scent of whale. Though their bodies carried the smell home, it was their stories that carried the true weight, the enduring legacy of a way of life now vanished, but never forgotten. Returning to a changed world when the voyage finally ended, the whalers stepped ashore into a world that no longer felt like home. Time had moved differently on land, quicker, lighter, less burdened by the endless rhythm of sea and labor. The men found themselves strangers, carrying with them not only the lingering smell but a weight of experience impossible to share. They struggled to adjust to stillness after months, sometimes years, of constant movement and purpose. The invisible chains of duty and debt for many, the financial realities kept them tethered to the sea. Debts accrued from outfitting the voyage, buying clothes, or borrowing for comforts at port meant that signing on again was often the only option. The lure of land faded quickly against the certainty of the ships, steady, grim, demanding, and relentless. Family and community, fragile bonds, reunion brought joy and tension alike. Wives, children, and parents had lived in constant anxiety, hoping for safe returns, yet knowing of the ship's dangers. The men's changed bodies and minds sometimes created distance, misunderstandings born of unspoken pain. Yet, communities held together, tightly knit by shared survival and stories told over flickering hearts, whispering of lives spent chasing giants across the endless blue. The end of an era. By the late 19th century, the great age of whaling waned. Steam-powered ships and petroleum replaced the old ways. The smell of blubber vats faded from ports, replaced by new industries and hope. But the ghosts of those voyages carved in Scrimshaw, whispered in they are echoes of a world harsh, dangerous, and unforgiving. A world where only the strongest endured, and even they, wouldn't have lasted a day. A final whisper. So now as you drift, imagine yourself aboard that creaking ship once more. Feel the salt air, the weight of history, the lingering scent of blubber and hardtack. Let it fade gently as sleep carries you away. And know that while those men faced a constant struggle, you at last have found rest. Scrimshaw and silence. Art born of boredom at sea. The ship creaks and sighs as it rocks gently on the indifferent swell of the endless ocean. Below deck, away from the roaring wind and the clang of iron, there exists a fragile pocket of silence, a refuge carved out by time and habit, a space where the scrimshander works. His hands, weathered and calloused from months of hauling rope and wrestling so, cradle a whale tooth that gleams ghostly white in the dim lantern light. The tooth's surface is rough and pitted from years submerged in the sea, but to him, it is a canvas waiting to tell a story. His tool is simple, a small, sharp needle, fashioned from bone, the point worn down, but still keen enough to etch the fine lines that will soon bring the ivory to life. The scratching sound is soft, almost meditative, a whisper against the thick wooden walls around him. It is a rhythm born of boredom and necessity, a delicate rebellion against the crushing monotony of the long voyage. The image slowly emerges, a whaleboat battling a gargantuan beast, the sinewy lines of the crew straining against the sea. The artist's eyes narrow as he concentrates, his breath shallow. The air thick with the mingled smells of salt, sweat, and stale tobacco smoke. Each scratch is deliberate, a tiny rebellion against the endless gray sky outside, a way to capture fleeting moments of beauty amid hardship. Around him, the ship hums softly, a living, breathing organism of wood and iron. The creak of timbers, the distant groan of rigging taut with wind, the faint lapping of water against the hull, these sounds become the backdrop to this quiet act of creation. The scrimshander's mind drifts to the shores he left behind, the smell of pine trees, the laughter of children, the warmth of a hearthrug. He carves these memories into the ivory, preserving them in lines and shadows. This is more than art. It is a lifeline, a tether to a world beyond the relentless toil of harpoons and blubber. Each piece of scrimshaw is a story, a prayer, a fragment of a soul preserved in bone. Some tell of home tiny cottages with smoke curling from chimneys, the names of sweethearts penned in delicate script. Others recount the terror and triumph of the hunt whales breaching, boats capsizing, men lost to the sea. The act of scrimshaw is both solitary and communal. Often, sailors gather to show their works in progress, sharing stories and laughs in the flickering candlelight. The carvings become currency of friendship, a way to pass time, a means of asserting identity amid the anonymity of shipboard life. Time, measured by the scraping of needle on ivory, stretches endlessly. The days blur the endless gray skies. The cold spray of sea foam, the harsh cries of gulls overheal fall away as the scrimshander loses himself in his craft. Here, in this tiny world of etched bone, he is master of his fate, creator of beauty amid the brutal landscape of the ocean. And as the ship sails ever onward, carrying its cargo of men and memories, these small pieces of scrimshaw endure silent witnesses to a life defied by hardship, resilience, and the stubborn will to create something lasting in the face of transience. The materials and methods, whalebone, needles, and the art of patience, the scrimshander's tools are deceptively simple, but each carries the weight of necessity and ingenuity born from a harsh life at sea. The whale tooth or bone gleaming, pale and cool in the lantern's glow, is the raw material, a treasure salvaged from the massive creatures they have hunted and butchered. It is a piece of the beast that once ruled the ocean's depths, now repurposed into an object of delicate craftsmanship. The needles and awls used for etching are often handmade, crafted from bone, metal shards, or even broken harpoons. Their tips, sharpened through constant use, dance lightly across the ivory's surface, producing a faint rasping sound that is both rhythmic and hypnotic. Each stroke is an exercise in patience. Too heavy a hand and the fragile ivory could splinter, ruining hours of painstaking work. Preparing the surface is an art in itself. The scrimshander must sand and polish the ivory, smoothing it to a fine sheen, before the first line can be etched. This process takes time, the coarse sandpaper worn by countless hands, the steady rubbing producing a soft, almost musical friction. The men aboard have learned to treasure these quiet moments of preparation, now calm before the storm of labor and danger. Pigments are sometimes applied to the carved line suit from the lamps, powdered charcoal, or even crushed berries added to highlight the fine details and bring the scenes to life. The contrast of dark lines against creamy ivory transforms the piece from a simple carving into a vivid narrative, capturing the imagination and the eye. Creating scrimshaw requires more than just skill. It demands a steady heart and a mind trained to focus amid chaos. The sea is an unpredictable master, with sudden storms, violent rolls, and the ever-present threat of danger. Yet in the midst of this turmoil, the scrimshander finds a sanctuary in the slow, methodical work of carving. Time is marked not by hours or days, but by the gradual emergence of a scene, the curve of a whale's back, the taut muscles of a sailor hauling rope, the curl of a wave frozen forever in ivory. Each completed piece is a silent testament to endurance and creativity, a small rebellion against the relentless hardship of life at sea. The scrimshander's work is often undervalued, dismissed by some as mere pastime or distraction. But to those who understand, these carvings are priceless, an archive of experience, a visual diary etched into bone, holding the memories of men who lived and died chasing the leviathans of the deep. Life between whales, the quiet hours, and the stories etched in ivory when the chase was over and the decks had been scrubbed clean of blood and blubber. The men found themselves with a rare time that stretched wide and slow between the bursts of brutal labor. In these quiet hours, scrimshaw became both solace and ritual, a way to anchor oneself amidst the drifting vastness of the ocean. The scrimshander sat alone, or sometimes in small groups, the flicker of oil lamps casting long shadows across the worn wooden planks. Conversation softened to murmurs, voices hushed as hands worked tirelessly, tracing fine lines and etching tailies onto whale teeth and bones. These pieces were more than art. They were vessels of memory, each detail capturing moments of hope, fear, camaraderie, and longing. Stories were exchanged, tales of daring escapes, sea monsters glimpsed in the fog, and the strange customs of faraway lands visited between whaling voyages. These narratives, passed from sailor to sailor, were immortalized in the carvings, forever frozen in ivory as whispers from a world beyond the ship. The solitude of scrimshaw also gave men time to reflect on the loved ones left behind, on the dangerous journey ahead, and on their own place in a vast, indifferent universe. The steady rhythm of carving soothed restless minds, providing a meditative focus amid the relentless uncertainty of whaling life. Yet the carvings were not always somber. Some were playful, even humorous, a cheeky sketch of a grinning captain, a satirical jab at a particularly brutal first mate, or a whimsical depiction of a whale being outsmarted by clever sailors. These lighter pieces provided welcome relief, a reminder that even in hardship, humanity's spark could flicker bright. Through the scrimshander's hands, the whale's ivory became a canvas of lived experience, a tactile record of life's fleeting moments aboard the ship. Each stroke of the oar was a whisper, a heartbeat, a prayer cast into the endless sea. The weight of silence, isolation, and the mental toll in the vastness of the open ocean. Silence stretched thicker than fog, away from the frantic bustle of whale chasers and flensing. The ship became a floating island of isolation, a place where the mind could wander dangerously close to the edges. Days melted into each other, and the same endless gray sky weighed heavily on every soul aboard. The relentless monotony bred an invisible enemy, the creeping despair that settled quietly in the corners of the mind. The men, hardened by sea and struggle, were not immune. Letters from home were scarce and often delayed, news of loved ones uncertain. Each wave seemed to carry away fragments of hope. Conversations dwindled, laughter became rare. The quiet was filled instead by the creaks and groans of the ship itself with settling, ropes sighing in the wind, and the soft slap of waves against the hull. Some men took to solitary rituals, staring out at the horizon for hours, murmuring prayers under their breath, or clutching keepsakes worn thin with touch. Others turned to their cups, seeking numbness in the bitter burn of rum. Mental fatigue twisted into paranoia or bouts of anger. Arguments flared, brief but fierce, before dissolving back into silence. In the darkest moments, some men spoke of ghost shadows in the mist or memories haunting the decks. The ship surgeon, when present, often found himself battling unseen wounds, those of the mind. Treatments were rudimentary, a stiff drink, a quiet word, a watchful eye. Yet, despite the oppressive silence, the men clung to routines, rituals that imposed order on chaos. The rhythm of chores, the setting of sails, the passing of watches all became lifelines, anchors in the storm of isolation. In these lonely stretches, the crew's strength was tested not by the sea's fury, but by the quiet within. The long road home, returning from the endless sea. At last, the endless days, the shoreline appears, first as a thin grey line, then a haze, then solid earth beneath the sails. The men's hearts stir relief, weariness, and a quiet dread mingle. Home is no sanctuary. The sea's odor clings stubbornly to skin and clothes. The hands that once held harpoons now tremble with unfamiliar lightness. The port town is bustling, filled with people whose lives have marched steadily on, while the whalers drifted far from the shore. Here, the men shed their ship-bound existence slowly, some drinking to forget, others reuniting with families they barely recognize. The stories they carry are heavy, etched with the salt of survival and the weight of loss. The work is not over. Barrels of oil are traded, debts settled, and new contracts offered to those brave enough or desperate enough to sign on again. But beneath the commerce, the quiet truth remains. The sea has changed them. Their bodies bear scars. Their minds hold memories no one ashore can understand. As the ship's rigging is repaired and provisions restocked, a final hush settles. The men know the sea calls again, not gently, but persistently. And so, the cycle begins anew, a constant struggle against nature, against time, against the parts of themselves left behind on those rolling waves. For the whalers, home is both a refuge and a reminder. The ocean's pull is eternal. The last voyage, into the unknown mist. The dawn breaks, pale and thin, casting a silver light over the restless sea. Your ship creaks beneath you, wooden bones straining against the cold morning breeze. The sails, patched and weathered, flapped softly like tired wings. The men move quietly, faces drawn tight with fatigue and resolve. There is a familiar weight in the air, a mixture of hope and dread as you prepare for what might be the final journey. Maps are spread across rough tables, ink blurred by salt and sweat. The captain traces uncertain lines toward uncharted waters, where icebergs drift like ghostly sentinels. The cold bites deeper here. Breath becomes visible, a brief mist, fading into the endless gray. Every sound is magnified, the slap of a wave against hull, the creak of rigging, the soft shuffle of boots on deck. You pull your coat tighter, muscles stiff from endless nights spent bracing against the chill. The horizon blurs, promising nothing but uncertainty. This voyage is different. It's not just the pursuit of whales or profit anymore. It's a test of endurance, a dance with the unknown that stretches beyond maps and reason. The men understand this unspoken truth. Each step forward is a step further from safety, and yet there is no turning back. The chill that settles deep. The chill is no longer just a breath of cold air. It seeps into your bones, creeping slowly through every layer of fabric and flesh. Your fingers, numb and stiff, fumble with the ropes as you steady yourself against the heaving deck. Each knot feels like a battle against frostbite's slow siege. The ship's timbers groan with a tired resignation, echoing the creaks and pops that speak of years spent braving the sea's cruelty. The salty spray freezes in the air, tiny diamonds suspended in the gray morning light before settling like frost on the rigging. Men move with slow, deliberate care, knowing that a single slip here could mean disaster. Their breath comes in steady, visible puffs, mingling with the faint smoke from the tripodes, where the last of the whale oil is rendered. Its acrid smell, a harsh reminder of days spent chasing giants beneath this unforgiving sky. You catch the glint of frost on the wooden rails, sharp, crystalline, and deadly to the unwary. The cold makes every task harder, each motion a fight against the slowing pulse of your own blood. Below deck, the cabins are no refuge. Damp and dark, the wood swells with moisture, the air thick with a mingled sense of sweat, salt, and stale tobacco. The men's hushed voices carry stories of home, of the families left behind, whispered against the backdrop of the ship's relentless creaking. Outside, the sea stretches out, vast and empty and unending grey canvas, broken only by the jagged silhouette of ice. It is both beautiful and brutal, a reminder that nature's power humbles even the strongest of men. You wrap your coat tighter, the fabric threadbare but stubborn. Every shiver reminds you, this is a world that doesn't forgive weakness. The cold is a constant companion now. It does not relent, it does not tire, and neither can you. Frozen breath and fading light as the day drags on. The pale sun dips lower, casting long, ghostly shadows across the deck. The sky, a blanket of steel-grey clouds, seems to press down, heavy and unyielding. The air grows even colder, biting through your scarf, seeping into the gaps between your gloves and coat. Each breath you take comes out in frosted puffs, hanging in the air like fleeting spirits before fading into the endless grey. Your lungs burn with the sharpness of the cold, It's a reminder that survival here is a quiet, grinding test of the men's movements slow, fatigue settling in alongside the cold. Faces are pale and drawn, eyes squinting against the wind and the low light. Their bodies are wrapped in layers of rough wool and patched leather, the only armor against this living frost. Below deck, the sounds of quiet murmurs and the occasional cough echo faintly, muffled by the thick wooden planks. The air is damp and heavy, more suffocating than the chill above, a different kind of burden pressing on your chest. You glimpse the flicker of candlelight from a small lantern, throwing a soft amber glow on the weathered faces of those trying to find warmth in the cramped quarters. Their eyes tell stories of homes far away, of wives and children, and the aching pull of loneliness that follows each voyage. Back on deck, the rigging creaks and moans as the ship shudders against the restless sea. Ice crystals cling to every surface shimmer like fragile glass sculptures, yet sharp enough to draw blood with careless contact. The whale oil tripods hiss and sputter, their heat a cruel contrast to the pervasive cold. The smell is thick, oily, and bitter, curling through the air and mixing with the scent of salt and smoke. Your hands ache from the cold and labor, fingers stiff and clumsy, but the work must go on. Every rope tightened, every sail adjusted, every barrel secured is a small victory against the vast, indifferent ocean. The cold is a thief, stealing strength and will, but there is no room for surrender. The ship groans again, ancient beast, that has survived storms, ice, and time itself. And so must you. Nightfall's grip and the weight of silence, darkness falls like a heavy shroud, swallowing the horizon whole. The cold doesn't just seep into your bones anymore. It becomes part of you, a living presence pressing on your chest, stealing breath and warmth with merciless patience. The ship creaks and shivers in the relentless night wind, timbers groaning under the stress, like the weary sighs of men who've endured too much. Every rope snaps tight with a sharp, unforgiving crack, echoing into the void like a warning. Your fingers are numb stubs wrapped in frozen leather. The salt and grime have cracked the skin into a patchwork of pain, yet every motion is deliberate, every knot tied, every sail hold is an act of defiance against the suffocating dark and the ever-present threat of despair. Above, the stars are cold pinpricks of light, distant and indifferent. Their silent gaze is a reminder of your place in this vast, merciless world. A tiny flicker of life fighting against the crushing void. The men's voices, once loud and coarse, have dwindled to hushed murmurs. Sleep is a stranger, snatched away by the chill and the endless creak of the ship. Every shadow feels like a lurking menace, every gust of wind a whispered threat. Below deck, the air is thick with the stale scent of sweat, oil, and old wood. Lanterns flicker uncertainly, casting long, wavering shadows on faces drawn tight with exhaustion and the slow unraveling of hope. The memories of home, a warm fire, a familiar face, drift like ghosts through the cramped quarters, almost unbearable in their sweetness and distance. The whale oil tripods, once a roaring inferno of industry, now hiss with a fragile flame, barely holding back the cold that threatens to snuff it out. Their oily scent mingles with the bitter tang of fear and fatigue. Your heart pounds with the weight of countless dangers faced and still looming. Every breath is a battle, every step a test of will. In this frozen cathedral of hardship, time loses meaning. Minutes stretch into hours, each one a slow march toward an uncertain dawn. Yet, even as the night tightens its grip, the stubborn pulse of life beats on. The ship and its crew endure, battered, bruised, but unbroken. Dawn's fragile promise and the long road home. As the first faint glow of dawn creeps across the horizon, it feels almost cruel soft light spilling over a world worn thin by suffering and relentless labor. The sea, still slate, grey and unyielding, mirrors the cruise, quiet, exhaustion, a vast expanse of uncertainty. You stand at the rail, the bitter wind biting through every layer, the salt spray freezing on your weathered skin. The ship, battered and scarred, creaks one last defiant chorus before the day fully wakes. Each breath you draw a taste of salt and smoke, hope and hardship mingled like the oil-streaked decks beneath your boots. The men, ragged and silent, begin to stir. Their faces, pale and hollowed by cold and weariness, hold the unspoken question. What next? The long journey home stretches ahead a slow, arduous crawl back to familiar shores, but nothing will be quite the same. For some, this voyage will mark the end of their days at sea, a grim chapter closed in bone and memory. For others, a lifetime of haunted dreams and scars barely healed. Behind you, the tripods crawled to a dull grey, their work done. The fat, rendered and stored precious cargo that will bring life to towns far away, where the stench of blubber will be replaced by the faint glow of lamps in sleepy harbour streets. You turn your gaze toward the horizon, the rising sun, breaking the night's hold, fragile and fleeting. The promise of warmth, rest, and something like peace beckons yet, the rhythm of the ship, the pull of the sea, and the stories carved deep into your bones remind you this is but a pause. The whale's silent presence beneath the waves endures, a testament to the fierce and fatal dance between man and nature. And as the ship limps forward, a battered vessel full of ghosts and memories, you close your eyes and let the endless rolling rhythm of the ocean carry you ever onward, ever deeper into the past. And the stories that keep you awake in the dark, a soft, reflective closing. The whisper of the sea and the echoes of time. Close your eyes once more. Let the rhythm of the waves carry you gently back to that creaking, salty ship, long since vanished beneath the fog of centuries. The whale's breath, the clang of iron tools, the faint groan of timber settling all. These sounds now live only in the quiet corners of history, like whispers fading into dusk. We've traveled through cold mornings smelling of mold and salt, through endless days of back-breaking labor and nights heavy with smoke and oil. You've felt the sting of wind cutting through worn clothes, the dull ache of muscles pushed beyond their limits, and the strange, biting comfort of shared suffering in cramped quarters. The men aboard those ships were more than sailors, were fragments of a harsh world, caught in a ceaseless struggle against nature, fate, and time itself. Their lives were etched in hardship, but also in resilience, a rhythm as relentless as the tides. Imagine now the distant harbors, where wives waited with bated breath, where townsfolk eyed the returning ships with a mix of hope and dread. The oil from blubber would light lamps, fuel lamps that brightened lives ashore, even as the smell of the sea clung stubbornly to everything. Yet, even with all this, the whaling ships were places where survival was a daily gamble, where death was never far, and where the human spirit was both tested and shaped by the cruelest of classrooms to open ocean. But history is not just a collection of facts and date. It is a tapestry woven from countless small moments, the groan of a tired man, the snap of a harpoon line, the taste of hardtack dusted with weevils. It's in these details that the true story breathes. So as you drift deeper into sleep, let the endless swell of the sea carry you far from here. Let the stories linger like a fading melody, soft and slow, as the past and present intertwine in the quiet dark. Rest, not for tomorrow. The waves will continue their timeless song, and somewhere in the deep, the whale still moves beneath the surface on eternal echo of a world long gone but never forgotten.